guys, my name is Ashley Lillis. Welcome to my channel. Today I'm going to show you exactly how to knit this cozy sweater. It's knit from the top down, but it is a drop shoulder sweater, and I designed it like this because I'm going to show you exactly how to make this with any needle size and any yarn weight you've got available. If you guys find this video helpful, enjoyable, please give it a thumbs up, and please also subscribe to my channel. It just helps other knitters find it a little bit more easily, so I would appreciate the support. Thanks. All right, guys, I am just gonna give you a brief overview of how the sweater is made. I feel like you need a good kind of big picture understanding just so you can visualize how it's made. This just will help you figure out how to make it fit you. It'll help you figure out if you are going to use a different needle size and yarn weight, how to continue making this no matter what your gauge is. Okay, so we are going to cast on in the round using 24-inch needles. We do a knit 3, purl 1 collar for about 3 inches. So that for me is about 12 rounds. You know, if you're using a different needle size and you have a different gauge, you just continue on for the same length and don't pay attention to the number of rounds because your rounds will be more than mine. And then we place stitch markers on either side here halfway through, and we are going to do raglan increases in the round until we get to our desired sweater width. Now this is where you need to take a tape measure and measure from about halfway down your shoulder, halfway down your arm, in between your elbow and the top of your shoulder. And this is where you're going to want your sweater to hit. If you want it to hit a little longer, that's fine. If you want it to hit higher, that's fine too. But just figure out the width of your shoulder, the width of the sweater you want. Just for reference, so you know, the sweater I knit is about 24 inches wide. So that's 48 inches in the round. It's pretty large. I have about a 37-inch bust, so that is about 11 inches of positive ease. But again, because it is a drop shoulder sweater, it needs to be pretty wide. So you're gonna knit in the round to your desired sweater width, and then we're gonna separate the front and the back, and you're gonna knit the front and the back separately to create these armhole openings. Now I made my armhole openings pretty narrow because I wanted the sweater sleeves to fit a little more snug around my arm. My sleeve is about 6 inches in diameter, so about 12 inches circumference. So that's pretty tight. If you want to create a larger sleeve opening, you may. And then I continued the body, and it is totally, in total, it's about 13 inches or so from the underarm to the end of the sweater. So that's just the size I knit for reference. This is a pretty generous, the way it's constructed, it's pretty generous. I mean, you want to give yourself a lot of width for it to fit comfortably, but again, you can make this kind of any width you want. You just continue the increases until you get to the sweater width you want. To knit this sweater, you will need 3 to 4 skeins of Lion brand respun thick and quick yarn if you are following along exactly how I'm making the sweater and want to use the same yarn with the same gauge. This is the yarn I used. Again, 3 to 4 skeins. This is the color Desert Sand. One skein has 223 yards, 204 meters, and is 12 ounces or 340 grams. This is considered a super bulky weight yarn. However, it is not the thickest super bulky weight yarn. That's why I'm using 9mm needles. Just wanted to let you know that I will be explaining exactly how to convert knitting this sweater with another yarn weight or needle size. So stay tuned, or you can jump ahead to that part in the video using the chapters I have outlined below. So that is the yarn I used. You will need a tape measure. You will need a tapestry needle to weave in ends. You will need 2 stitch markers in 2 different colors, one to denote the beginning of round marker and one to denote the middle of the work. And you will need scissors. You will also need, as far as needle sizes, again, I used 9mm needles in 3 different lengths. I used 16-inch needles for the sleeves. I cast on the collar and knit the collar with the 24-inch needles and started the increases. And then when things got too big on those 24-inch needles, I moved to a 40-inch needle. You can use anything over, I'd say go for anything over a 32-inch. The needles need to be pretty long so you can hold a lot of stitches once you increase to a lot of stitches. Okay, don't be intimidated, guys. I want to go over a little bit of math, but the purpose of this is to show you how to figure out how many stitches to cast on in a different yarn weight and needle size if you don't want to knit with the same yarn and needle size that I am using. Let's say you've got a bunch of this yarn sitting in your stash and you want to knit with this, and it's knit with 6mm needles, and the new gauge is 15 stitches for 4 inches. Okay, well, the first thing we do is we cast on for the collar in a certain length in my gauge, right? So you need to figure out how many stitches to cast on for the same size. You want the sweater to fit similarly, so you need to figure out how long the collar is, because you need to determine how many stitches you should cast on to fit the same length. It might sound confusing, but here, I'll take you through it a little bit here. So let's say, so you know my gauge is 10 stitches for 4 inches, okay? And we cast on 60 stitches for the collar. So we're just doing a ratio here. The stitches to inches for the gauge and stitches to inches for the collar to figure out how long the collar is, okay? And when we solve for X, we do 60 times 40 divided by 10 to solve for X. Our collar length is 24 inches. So you don't need to do this math. You can just use this. Our collar length is 24 inches, okay? Let's say you want to use this buttercream yarn and our gauge is 15 stitches for 4 inches. So we write that out, enter our new ratio. Our old one was 10 to 4. Our new one is 15 to 4. Okay, so now we need to just solve for X to figure out how many stitches to cast on for 24 inches, that same length. And when you solve for X, the new cast on stitches would be 90. However, we've got to remember that this number needs to be divisible by 4. I know that 90 is not divisible by 4. You can go up 2 stitches to 92 or down 2 stitches to 88. You'll just have to play around by adding or subtracting a few stitches to get to a number divisible by 4. Okay, so you can use this same formula here. Plug in your gauge stitches. So grab whatever yarn you want to use, whether it's thicker or thinner, and just figure out what your gauge is compared to mine. So figure out, do a sample and figure out how many stitches per 4 inches you have when you knit your new gauge, and then you can just do this equation to figure it out. So plug in your number, okay, how many ever stitches you knit in 4 inches, and then you're going to solve for X. So your new cast on stitches is this number, that number of stitches, you plug that in here, times 24, divided by 4. And that will give you your new cast on stitches. And remember just to make sure it's divisible by 4, because our collar is knit 3, purl 1. So it needs to be divisible by 4 so you end on a purl stitch. Okay, so that is how you find your new cast on stitches. And then you can follow along in my pattern in the instructions just as I do. If you are knitting with thinner yarn and smaller needles, you'll be knitting the same length, but you'll have more rows, right? It'll take you more rounds or rows to get to the same length. So you can start to just pay attention to overall length and width instead of the number of rounds or rows that I am talking about. So again, just keep in mind, you can pay attention to length instead of the number of rounds I complete. I'm going to start by casting on 60 stitches using the long tail cast on method, and I am using my 24-inch 9mm circular needle. So I'm going to use the long tail cast on method, so I need to make sure I have a long enough tail So I'm going to wrap the yarn around about 10 times to kind of just gauge how much I need for 10 stitches. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. And then that's for 10 stitches, so I'm going to multiply that by 6, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60. And then at the end, I am going to tie a slip knot by creating a loop, pulling the yarn through and tightening it. And then I'm going to put that slip knot on my needle. I am going to hold the long tail in front. I am going to grab the yarn like this. I am going to take my needle and insert it under the yarn around my thumb and over the yarn around my index finger and pull that yarn through. So that's 2 stitches I've got cast on. Under the yarn around my thumb, over the yarn around my index finger, and pull through. That's 3. 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So you're going to continue on until you have 60 stitches cast on. So I've cast on 60 stitches, and now we're going to join the work in the round. And the method that I am using to join the work in the round, I'm going to have you cast on 1 more stitch, so you have 61 stitches. We're going to use that extra stitch to connect the work, and we're going to end up dropping that stitch. So what you're going to want to do to join the work in the round is take your right hand needle, slip the yarn off the left hand needle, and then now we're going to take that first needle on, or the first stitch that was on your right hand needle, and slip that over the stitch we just moved over, and then we're going to drop that stitch. And you can pull tight there a little bit. Okay, so now you can put your stitch marker on to denote the beginning of the round. And now we have joined our work in the round. Okay, so now we are going to knit 3, purl 1. And this is our collar, and it gives us a little bit of a ribbed look without being really tight. So you're going to knit 3 stitches, bring the yarn in front, and then purl a stitch. Move the yarn to the back. We're going to knit 3 stitches, 1, 2, 3, and then purl a stitch. And I knit holding the yarn in my left hand. You can hold the yarn in your left hand or right hand. Same thing applies. 1, 2, 3. Bring the yarn in front. Move the yarn to the back. Knit 3. 1, 2, 3. Purl 1. And you just continue to work all the way across. 1, 2, 3, purl 1. All right, so I've worked all the way around. I have 4 stitches left. Knit 3, 2, 3, purl 1. And then when we get to the end of the round, we're simply going to slip the stitch marker and continue knitting the knit stitches and purling the purl stitches. So we're still going to knit 3 and then knit 1. So you're going to continue around doing the same round, knit 3, purl 1 for 8 rounds. And you can start to count by looking at the knit stitches here, 1, 2. So you're going to continue doing this for 8 rounds. So I will see you back here at the end of 8 rounds. All right, so I just completed 8 rounds, and you can count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And now I want you to get another stitch marker that's a different color. You've got one already on here to denote the beginning of round marker. And now we're gonna do a setup row where we just place another stitch marker halfway across the work. So I cast on 60 stitches. So I am going to need to place a stitch marker halfway through at 30 stitches. I am going to continue in this knit 3, purl 1 pattern. I also wanted you to kind of pause here and take a moment and figure out how tall you want your collar to be. I am going to continue on until I have completed 12 rounds for my collar. So it'll be a little bit taller than this. And then I'm gonna check and see if that's how tall I want it. If you want to stop now and make this more of, this is kind of more like a mock neck length, you can stop here and move ahead to an increase row. You can just skip ahead in the video and click the link in the chapters and go to that. Or you can stay and watch as I continue on. So basically, you are going to continue across half of the stitches in the same knit 3, purl 1 pattern, and then place the marker. So I will see you once I've hit 30 stitches here, or half of the stitches. So no matter how many stitches you cast on, just figure out what half of those stitches are. All right, so I have knit across 30 stitches, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18, 20, 22, 24, 26, 28, 30. Half of my stitches. And then I'm going to place my stitch marker on and then just continue to the beginning of the round. And if you want to stop at this length, then you can move forward to the increase row that's marked in the chapter. I will see you then anyway. I am going to complete 3 more rounds, so I have a total of 12 rounds for my collar. So I'll meet you back at the end of that. So I've completed 12 rounds, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12. And for me, that is about 4 inches or so, maybe just under 4 inches, just so you have that for reference. So we've got our collar, and now we are going to start increasing for the drop shoulder. And this is a little different. This is a drop shoulder sweater. It is not a raglan sweater, even though we are making increases similar to what we would do on raglan sweaters. We are going to just be increasing 4 stitches every round. So on a typical raglan sweater, you would increase 8 stitches every other round. We're going to be doing a much more drastic increase every round, but it's only on the front and the back. So the stitch marker denotes the front and the back. So that's just to give you a little reference. This is just a little bit different of a way to construct a drop shoulder sweater. I like to design sweaters from the top down because it's easier to customize your length and your width as well. So we are going to start the yoke of the sweater. So I am just going to finish the last stitch in this round here, that 12th round. And now we are simply going to start doing an increase after every marker, before the marker and after the marker. So we're starting this row here. We are going to knit 1 in the front and the back to do our increase. So you insert the needle as if you're gonna knit, pull the yarn through, and instead of pulling this stitch off the marker, you're gonna twist and insert the needle back into the stitch and knit. So we've knit 2 stitches in 1. Okay, so now you're gonna knit all the way over to the next marker. We're just knitting now. We're not going to be doing the knit 3, purl 1. Now we're just gonna be completing stockinette stitch every single round while we increase. All right, I'm making my way around to that second marker, and I'll show you how to, we're gonna knit 1 in the front and the back on that stitch right before the marker. So insert your needle as if to knit. Instead of slipping the stitch off, we're going to insert the needle in the back as well. Yarn over there on that needle and pull it through. So now we have 2 stitches. Okay, so we're gonna now slip the marker halfway through. This is not the beginning of a round marker. This is that first marker. And then we're gonna knit front and back again. Knit one in the front, knit one in the back. And now you're gonna just knit all the way around to the beginning of the round marker and knit one in the front and the back again. So I am one stitch before the beginning of round marker, so we're gonna knit in the front and the back again. Knit, oh. Goodness. Knit in the front, turn the work, knit in the back. All right, so I have finished the round here. So I have made 4 increases total, so I should have 64 stitches now. So you'll have 4 more stitches than what you originally started with. So now you are just going to continue knitting one in the front and the back on the stitch after the marker and before each marker every single round. There is no knit round in between. Like I said, this helps create more of a drastic increase for that drop shoulder. I'll just show you one more time what it looks like. So we're going to knit one in the front and the back before the marker, slip the marker, and right after the marker. And it gets a little tricky because you just did one right before. So that's the previous knit one in the front and the back. But just keep applying the same concept. All right, I'm nearing the end of the second round here. And I'm gonna knit one in the front and the back in this last stitch before the beginning of round marker. Again, you can see that I've already knit one in the front and back in the round before, but that's okay. That's what we're supposed to do. All right, so keep increasing in this fashion. Okay, and I will touch base with you here in a little bit after I've done a few more increase rounds, just so you can see what it's looking like. And then I will talk you through how wide you should make the sweater. So basically, if we are looking at the back of the sweater here, we are going to keep increasing for the shoulder out the side. And then once 1/2 of the sweater is the width that we want the sweater, that's as wide as you should make those increases. And then we will divide for the armhole. So I will touch base with you in a little bit after I've completed a few more increase rounds so you can see what the sweater is looking like. All right, I just wanted to show you what the sweater is looking like now after I have made multiple increase rounds here. And it's getting to the point where my stitches are feeling a little bunched on this 24-inch needle. So I am going to take my next size needle, it's about 36 inches, and I'm gonna show you how to switch needles once I get to the other side of this stitch marker. And I get to the other side of the stitch marker because I don't want the stitch marker to fall off as I knit these stitches off of this needle. So now I'm gonna just pull this side through a little bit so those stitches don't come off or fall off. I am gonna take my longer needle. I just want you to also see like what the increases are looking like now. They look really pretty. So once I get, you're just gonna knit these stitches off of the old needle onto the new needle. It's a little wonky because you've got these stitches kind of hanging out over here. But you simply just knit the stitches off of this needle. You're gonna increase on the other side where the stitch marker is as you would normally. All right, so I am nearing this next stitch marker. I'm gonna continue doing my increases as I normally would, even though I'm moving my stitches off of the needle. So slip the marker, knit one in the front and the back, and you just keep going knitting the stitches off the needle on the left-hand side to the needle on your right hand. All right, so I'm almost done here moving the stitches off. Again, just keep knitting the increases as you normally would. I'm at the beginning of round marker. I'm just gonna slip. I'm gonna do one more increase here, knit this stitch, and now I've moved all the stitches off of this needle onto this longer needle, and I wanted to show you what this is looking like now because you'll be able to see it. But you can see we've got our collar, and now we have these sharp increases for our shoulder. So you can switch, a 40-inch needle would probably work as well. I know the circular needle lengths come in all different sizes, and sometimes they say they're one length and they're really not. So basically you just want like one or two lengths up from a 24-inch. So I've completed 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 rounds. And so that means I've increased 20 stitches on one side, so 40 stitches overall. So if I cast on 60 stitches and I've added 40, I've got 100 stitches. So I need to do, I am going to increase to 120 stitches. So I need to make sure I knit 5 more rounds to increase another 20 stitches. I am finishing up my last round here. I'm going to knit one in the front and the back. And I want to show you how to separate now for the front and the back, so we can work back and forth for the front and the back to create the openings for the armholes. So we've knitted the front and back together, and now we need to separate them. I also want to show you this so you can try on the work and slip it over your head and see how far down it comes on your shoulders to see if it is the right length. You know, I have a pattern written out, but I basically want to show you how to customize this so you can figure out how to knit this design with any size needle and any yarn weight. You don't have to follow a specific number of stitches or number of rounds. I want you to be able to customize this how you want. So this is how you would both divide for the front and the back to make the sleeves and try on the work. So I'm gonna basically just take the stitch marker off, set it aside, and I am going to move the front stitches onto a piece of waste yarn. So I've got my tapestry needle and a piece of waste yarn that's pretty long. It needs to fit half of the stitches on comfortably with some tails at either side. So you basically just slip the stitches off of the needle onto the piece of waste yarn, and you're gonna work all the way across half the stitches to the next marker. And you just pull the yarn through as you go. So I've almost reached the point where I'm hitting that next marker, so that means I know I'm halfway through. And I did want to mention, I keep saying front and back. There really is no difference. The front is made the same way as the back. So when you get to the last stitch, you just take off that stitch marker. Okay, and we are going to weave the yarn through, pull it through. And I am going to show you what it looks like now. So I'm also on the other, so I've got one half of the sweater on the piece of scrap yarn. I'm going to take off the tapestry needle, and I've got the other half on the circular needles. And so basically you can kind of see now how we've created this drop shoulder, and we've made increases every round to create this steep shoulder expansion here for our drop shoulder. So now we are going to separate for the front and the back and just knit stockinette stitch for the arm depth that we want. So now is a good time to try on the sweater and make sure it is at the right width for you. Make sure that it sits where you want it to sit over your head. So I'll show you what that looks like. Guys, I just wanted to show you how to try this sweater on so you can make sure it is at the width that you want for dividing for the front and the back and making your sleeves. So I have the piece of waste yarn in front. I have the longer circular needles in the back. I just slipped it over my head, and I think it is at the point where I want it. I wanted it to come down pretty far on my arm. We do want this to fit a little wider, okay? That's the goal of the design. If you would like to make it not so wide, you don't have to come out as far with your increases. But like I said, I increased to 60 stitches in this gauge for the front and both the back. So I have a total of 120 stitches. I'll give you more measurements once I measure with a tape measure when it's flat. But anyway, I think I'm comfortable with this. If you want to put the stitches back on and make it wider, you can keep knitting in the round and increasing until you get to the width you want. So now we are going to knit the front and the back separately to create holes for our arms. And I will show you how to do that. Just a note on the arms, I did design this so that the arms fit a little more snug. They're not supposed to be real bulky and oversized because the sweater is meant to fit so boxy. Again, you can create more armhole depth if you would like for a wider sleeve. But just wanted to give you a little insight on how to try this on, how to make this more of a custom fit for you. But let's get ready to knit the front and the back. And just a note on how wide it is now. So my gauge is 10 stitches for 4 inches, and I have knit up to 60 stitches. So I just need to multiply 4 inches by 6, because 10 times 6 is 60. So 4 inches times 6 inches is 24 inches for one side. So that is quite wide. That is a 48-inch circumference. Again, this sweater is meant to be very oversized. So that just gives you a little bit of reference on how wide the sweater is. Okay, so we have our scrap yarn on one side. We have our yarn on circular needles on one side. So now we are going to knit back and forth. So we should have our yarn here, and we are going to just start working a stockinette stitch here. And I am going to just knit, I'm going to purl back here. So we're going to purl on the wrong side of the work and knit on the right side of the work. That creates stockinette stitch when we are knitting flat. When we knit in the round, all we did was knit every round. But now we are working back and forth for that sleeve opening. You are going to continue stockinette stitch until you reach half of the length of the circumference of your arm, plus, you know, maybe an inch or so. So I'm going to keep knitting until I get to about around 6 inches. I want this sweater to fit my arm pretty tight. Probably right around the circumference of, I'm probably going to make it the exact circumference of my arm, maybe a few stitches, few rows longer, just because I want it to fit pretty snug. All right, I'm nearing the end of this first row where I purled. So now all I'm gonna do is turn the work and knit all the way back. So knitting on the right side, purling on the wrong side. And you can continue until you get to the armhole depth that you want. I have listed out some sizes for reference, but you can measure the circumference of your arm at the point where this end hit you on your arm, so that, you know, if you decide to make the sweater not quite as boxy, you'll probably need more depth for your armhole because your arm is larger as you get close to your shoulder. And the farther you go out, the narrower your arm gets. So you can just kind of try the sweater on, see where it hits you on your arm, measure the circumference of your arm at that point, and knit about half the length of that circumference to get you to 1/2 of the armhole depth, because the other half will be made on the other side. And you might want to go maybe 1/2 inch bigger so you have a little bit of ease around your arm. So I will see you back here when I get to the point where I've finished this side, the front of the armhole depth that I want. I have finished knitting the front, for the armhole here. And like I said, we knit back and forth. And I knit for about 6 inches or so. It's maybe a little bit more. And I just wanted to talk to you about the size of the armhole. So you can customize this to make it as big as you would like. My design, how I have it fitting pretty snug around your arms because I have the body being a little bit bigger. I wanted the arms to be a little bit more form-fitting around your arms so it didn't seem so bulky overall. If you would like to make the armholes bigger, feel free to continue. I am going to show you how to figure out how big to make your armholes. So I measured my arm around, the circumference around my arm where the sweater hit once I tried the sweater on. So it is about 12 inches in circumference where I have the sweater hitting. So my arm is 12 inches. So I would need to knit this to be around 6 inches because we're going to knit the back for another 6 inches. So I divided my arm circumference 12 inches by 2, which is 6. So that is how long I made this. The other kind of tricky thing is our sleeve cuff is going to follow this collar ribbing, which is made in multiples of 4 because we're knitting 3 stitches and purling 1. So we cast on stitches in multiples of 4 to have the stitch count work out evenly. So when we pick up stitches for our arm, we need to pick it up so that it is in multiples of 4 as well. So I just know that I am going to pick up 28 stitches because 28 is divisible by 4. And to kind of work out the math for the length and how many rows I did, we are going to be picking up 3 stitches for every 4 rows when we pick up for the arms. That's picking up stitches perpendicularly to the body here. So when I say pick up three stitches for every 4 rows, it's 3 stitches going this way for these rows. So that looks like this. Pick up 1, 2, skip a stitch, 3. Okay? 4, 5, skip a stitch, 6. 7, 8, skip a stitch, 9. 10, 11, skip a stitch, 12. 13, 14. I know that can be kind of confusing to those of you who are new at picking up stitches, but basically we don't want to pick up a stitch for every stitch when we are picking up perpendicularly to the work. The work is a bit, basically we need to reduce the number of stitches so that it lays nicely. If we were to pick up every single stitch, the work would balloon out a little bit. So we have to skip some stitches so that the work lays a little bit flat and that our stitches work out nicely. Okay, so when we pick up stitches, we do 1, 2, skip a stitch, 3. 1, 2, skip a stitch, 3. 1, 2, skip a stitch, 3. That's picking up 3 stitches for every 4 rows. But now I'm also counting to make sure my stitch count, I'm trying to get 28 stitches overall for the sleeve. I'm dividing that by half, 14. I need to get 14 stitches. I need to pick up 14 stitches along this sleeve. So anyway, I have the pattern written kind of generically, but my goal with all of my projects is just to explain to you how things are designed and constructed so you can easily modify it to fit you. All right, so we've finished knitting to our length. However, our yarn is still attached on this side. We do want to make sure when we are knitting the front and the back, we're ending after a wrong side row. So go ahead and knit back 1 more row so you end after a wrong side row and then snip a tail. All right, so we have worked the front. We're gonna keep our stitches on this long circular needle, because in the end, we're going to be joining the body back together once we have knit the back. So we're just going to keep these stitches on this needle. We're going to turn the work to get ready to work the back now. And the back stitches are still on this piece of scrap yarn. And we are going to take these stitches off this piece of scrap yarn by just sliding them back on this needle. So just slowly work your way across here, picking all these stitches up. You can start to pull out your yarn if you would like, if it's too tight, or I like to just kind of pull it all out at the end. So just work your way across, picking up all these stitches. All right, I am almost done getting these stitches off of this piece of waste yarn. And again, I am just using my shorter 24-inch needle for this so I can keep my other side on my longer needles. So I am going to slide the waste yarn through. I usually push my stitches back on the wire or cord so the yarn comes out a little bit more easily. All right, so we have our stitches that we need to work the back on the needle. All right, so you're gonna start knitting on the right side, and we're just gonna join our work and start knitting on that 24-inch circular needle. The stitches might be a little tight, but that's okay. So to start and to join and to start knitting, you literally just start knitting. And make sure you've got a good tail going over here, and you're just gonna knit back and knit on the right side, purl on the wrong side for stack and knit stitch, and you're gonna complete this for the same amount of rows you completed the front of the work. I have just finished knitting the back. I have finished after a wrong side row. So now what's gonna happen is we're gonna turn the work. Okay, we've got our front stitches on this needle here. We've got our back stitches on this needle here. This is that 24-inch needle. So we want to use that longer needle. We're just going to start knitting with this longer needle. All the stitches will end up on this one. We're just going to start knitting across here and moving the stitches onto this needle, and then we'll join the work once we are done with this row. So I will meet you back here as I'm finishing this row of the back. All right, I am at the end of this row here, and now I'm simply going to join the work, and I'm going to take this needle and I am just going to keep knitting across here. I might have some pieces here, and you just need to tug on them a little bit. But there you go. So basically you just keep knitting across, joining the work in the round. We do need to mark the beginning of the round, and so that will be once we come back around to this other side. So once I get to the end of this row, we will place a marker to denote the beginning of round. All right, I just finished the round. I'm going to place a stitch marker there, and I'm simply going to just keep knitting. So now we've joined the work fully in the round on that longer circular needle. So now we are just going to be knitting in the round until our desired length from the underarm. I am going to knit this for about 10 inches or so and then probably try it on and see how it's fitting. So I will see you back here in a little bit once I've knit some length. And just note you will have a little bit of a gap here because we've just joined in the round by just continuing to knit. It'll tighten up as you continue to knit, and then we're going to be picking up stitches anyway for the arms. So we can fix all of those gaps those will get tighter as we pick up our stitches. So I will see you here in a little bit after you just keep knitting in the round for every round until your desired length from the underarm minus the length that we will have for the bottom ribbing. So we're going to continue knitting in the round, stockinette stitch, to the point where you would like the sweater to hit minus about 2 inches. Our collar is about 3 inches. We're going to complete the bottom ribbing for about 2 inches. So just keep that in mind when you are knitting and trying to figure out how long to make your sweater. So just make sure you stop in time to see how the sweater's fitting. I might stop after 9 inches or so and try it on and just see. But to try it on, I'll probably just move half of my stitches over to a piece of waste yarn and slip just like we did when we split the yarn from front to back. That just enables you to try on the sweater as it starts to get a little bit longer to see how it's fitting. So I have some measurements written just as guides in the pattern, but again, my goal with this tutorial is just to teach you how to customize a pattern to make something that fits you the way you want it to fit you. So again, I am just teaching you how to knit to the point that will get you to the length of the sweater that you want. Like I said, the goal with the written pattern is just to give you kind of like an overall guide. I have created this tutorial to not only show you how to make the sweater, but make it fit you the way you want it to fit and to teach you how to customize the sweater so it fits you. It's really hard to write patterns that will fit everybody, right? Like not every sweater in a store will fit everybody well, even in the various sizes. So this just teaches you how to customize things for you. So I will see you back here in a little bit. I am almost at the end of my first skein of this Lion brand respun, so I will show you how to join your next skein once I get there. Okay, I'm at the point where I need to join my next skein of yarn. So when you have enough yarn left to knit about 4 stitches plus a little bit of a tail, stop and take your new yarn, and you're going to be leaving another tail, a little bit of a tail over here, and you're going to hold the 2 strands together so you can knit the strands at the same time. And then when you've knit like 4 stitches, you just drop the old strand and continue knitting with the new one. So you will have these little double stitches here, but you'll barely be able to notice, but you just knit these stitches as if they were one when you come back around. All right, I have knit the body of the sweater for about 10 inches here, and now I am going to switch to the bottom ribbing, which will be the same pattern that we did for the collar, where we knit 3 and purl 1, knit 3, purl 1. So you should still have stitches on your needle in multiples of 4, because we started off with multiples of 4. We've increased every round 4 stitches, so we should still have multiples of 4 on our needle to make sure that the knit 3 purl 1 pattern still works for the bottom ribbing. So just take a quick count of your stitches, make sure you're good to go, and let's continue knitting. So we are just going to start our bottom ribbing by knitting 3 and purling 1 all the way around. And we are going to continue this knit 3 purl 1 for 8 rounds. So I will see you back here after we have completed 8 rounds of this knit 3 purl 1. We are going to continue knitting this bottom ribbing for just under 2 inches. So for me, that's about 8 rounds. If you are knitting in a different gauge with a different yarn needle size or yarn with thinner or thicker yarn, instead of following the number of rounds, I'm making just measure how long your work is. So we are completing the bottom ribbing for a total of 2 inches. So we are gonna do the ribbing for just under 2 inches to account for that last round where we bind off. All right, so I'm nearing the end of my 8th round here, or just under 2 inches for my bottom ribbing, and now I am going to bind off. So to bind off, we simply start the pattern and knit in the pattern for 2 stitches and slip 1 stitch, that first stitch, over that second stitch we just knit. And so now we'll have 1 stitch left on the needle. And I just want to say there are many different ways to bind off. This is what I find to be the easiest way to bind off. Use whatever bind off method you would like. Just a word of warning. So we are going to knit the next stitch and then just repeat that, slip that stitch over. Just a word of warning, you do want to try to bind off a little loosely. This traditional bind off method can be a little tight. So you just want to make sure you're binding off your stitches in a way that that's not so tight. So I just did a purl stitch because when you bind off, you want to continue the pattern we've already established, but you just keep binding off 1 stitch at a time. So that's knit 1, and then you just slip that stitch over, and you keep working all the way around, binding off as you go, working in the established pattern. And try to keep your tension consistent at the bottom. You can see the stitches now as we're binding off. I'm at a purl stitch. So continue this all the way around, and I will see you once we have completed nearly the first round, and I'll show you what to do when you get to the end. So I've bound almost all the way off. I have a few more stitches left. I'm going to continue knitting and binding off in the pattern, and then once I have 1 stitch left, I'm simply going to snip the yarn, leaving a little bit of a tail, about 6 inches or so. And then I am just going to take my needle and pull the yarn through. And then we will go back with the tapestry needle and weave in the ends. I like to do all that at the end. Okay, so now we have finished binding off the whole bottom of the sweater, and you can see how great that looks now. I'm just gonna raise this up a little bit so you can see kind of what the whole sweater is looking like. And we've got our collar at the top, we have our armholes, and now we have our bottom ribbing complete. So now we are gonna pick up and knit the sleeves. And like I said before, you're going to want to make sure that you have a number divisible by 4 along your armholes. So I am going to pick up 28 stitches. You could do 24, you could do 32, 36, 40. I wouldn't go down too much below 28. This is pretty tight as it is. I'll just do a little measurement here so you can see how big my opening is. It is around 7 inches or so, just for reference. So to pick up stitches for the sleeves, you're going to want to start, it doesn't matter which sleeve you start with, you're going to be completing both sleeves the exact same way. You're going to want to start down by the armhole picking up, okay? And we are going to pick up 3 stitches for every 4 rows. So we are working perpendicularly to the work, and we are going to pick up 2 stitches, skip a stitch, pick up the 3rd stitch. So that's 3 stitches for every 4 rows. So I will show you exactly what I mean here. All right, so you're going to take your 16-inch knitting needle, and you're going to leave a little bit of a tail here because you're going to want to be able to weave that in later, and that you can use that to also seam up any gaps for the armhole. So you're going to want to find the first stitch, and when we pick up stitches, we basically are going through the last stitch of that row perpendicularly. So you're going to be going through 2 stitches all the way up the side here. 2 stitches, it's really 1 knitting stitch, but 2 bars there. So you can see that there's this line that goes up the side. So we're going to be going in all of these stitches. So we're going to pick up our first stitch. And because I know I am picking up 28 stitches, I'm going to pick up 14 stitches. 28 divided by 2 is 14 along one side and 14 along the other side. So I'm going to try to space this out as best I can. And so I'm going to insert my needle here just above that bottom armhole. I am going to take my tail, and you basically just pull the stitch through and up. So that is picking up and knitting. I'm going to do that again. I caught a little bit of a stitch there. Okay, so we are going to go in this stitch here. I'm going to insert my needle and basically just pull the loop through. So this is called picking up and knitting because we have a new stitch on. Picking up is just inserting the needle. Picking up and bringing the loop through is picking up and knitting. So we're going to go 1 stitch, 2 stitch, skip a row, 3 stitches. So that is knitting 3 stitches for every 4 rows. So I've just picked up 3 stitches for 4 rows. Okay, so that's 3 stitches. So you have to count the stitches and also count to skip, which can be a lot. So that's 3 stitches, 4, 5, skip a stitch, 6, 7, 8, skip a stitch, 9, 10, 11, skip a stitch, 12. So I'm knitting 2 stitches and skipping a stitch. Now I've got a few more stitches here. And so I am just going to insert, I'm going to skip a stitch. So I'm just now, I only need 2 more stitches. So now I'm just kind of evenly picking up the stitches until I get to the top here. There's a little bit of a gap. So I'm going to go through this one and then move over to the other side. So I've got 14 stitches on this side, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14. And I'm going to turn the work and start going across here. All right. 1 stitch, 2, skip a row, 3, 4, 5, skip a row, 6, 7, 8, skip a row, 9, 10, 11, skip a row, 12, and then I've got 2 more stitches here. I'm just going to work in here kind of evenly, the bottom, and there we go. So we've got our 28 stitches now. We're going to join the work in the round. So grab a stitch marker. I'm going to get one that's a little more contrast so you can see. All right, so now we're going to join the work in the round. And I like to join in the round at the underarm by slipping the first stitch back over here to the right needle, from the left hand needle over to the right hand needle, slipping that last stitch that was on the left hand needle. Basically, I've moved the last stitches kind of over each other. I'm going to twist both the stitches so we can knit them more easily. And this can be a little wonky here. You can pull the tail to tighten the yarn a little bit. You're going to place the stitch marker, and now you can start knitting. There's lots of different ways to join at the underarm. You can pick up another stitch and knit them together. I am just showing you this because I think it's one of the more easy ways. Okay, so one thing to note when you pick up stitches, you pick them up in a way that puts them on the needle kind of backwards. So this first row, you're going to be inserting your right hand needle into the stitch this way. Normally when we knit, we go in this way from left to right. We're going to be going in from right to left so that the stitches don't end up twisted, just for this first round. Now, one thing to note, it is a little tight knitting with just 28 stitches on the needle, on the 16-inch circular needle. So it's totally doable, but it can just be a tad tight to deal with. As you get knitting, it'll be a little easier. But again, just remember to knit these stitches off from right to left instead of left to right for this very first round. And you just, because the stitches are a little tight, you'll probably need to push the stitches off the needle as you go a little bit more. So you're just going to knit all the way around, inserting your needle from right to left until you get to the beginning of the round. And then you are going to knit to the arm length you would like, minus about 6 inches. We are going to make a 6-inch cuff, so that would be almost double of our collar. We're going to do a really long cuff. And that's just something to keep in mind as you knit the sleeve. I'm almost all the way around here. I'm continuing to put the needle into the stitch from right to left, and then I'll just show you once we get to that beginning of round, I'll just show you that the stitches will be on the needle normally. All right, so I'm at the beginning of the round now. And that last stitch we twisted here. So I'm just going to knit that one normally because that stitch was twisted. And this one might get loose because this is the one that's connected to the tail we cast on. So you can kind of pull that and that'll help to tighten things up a little bit. So you'll just slip the needle. Sometimes it pops off, just put it back on. And now make sure you're knitting with the yarn attached to the skein and not the tail that you cast on with. And now you will just simply knit in the round as you normally would, inserting that needle from left to right now. So like I said, continue knitting until you get to the arm length you would like, minus about 6 inches for the cuff. And I definitely recommend trying the sweater on at this point if you're making the sweater for yourself to figure out how long to make the sleeve at this point. All right, so I will see you back here and show you the length once I have knit this for a little bit. All right, so I just completed about 10 inches of knitting in the round for my sleeve here. And now it is time to do the cuff. So that would be a total of about 16 inches for the sleeve when I tried it on. I tend to have a little shorter arm, so I'm finishing that last round there. And then now we're gonna do 6 inches of the cuff like this in the knit 3 purl 1. So we just start knitting 3 and purling 1. And so you're gonna wanna knit this for about 6 inches, knit 3, purl 1. And this is why we cast on multiples of 4 stitches so that we can do this pattern and end up with a purl stitch at the end of the row. So continue the knit 3, purl 1 for about 6 inches, and then we will bind off the same way as we did the bottom ribbing. So I will see you back here once I've completed 6 inches of the knit 3, purl 1. All right, so I am nearing the end of my cuff here. I've knit about 6 inches of the cuff in the ribbing. And when I'm at the end, I'm gonna bind off the same way as I did for the body ribbing. So you just slip the marker and then knit the first 2 stitches in the established pattern. So I knit 2, then you slip that stitch over, bind off a stitch, continue in the pattern, binding off as you go. Remember to keep it kind of a loose bind off. Keep the tension consistent. And just work your way across. All right, I'm nearing the end of my bind off here. I've got just a few more stitches left. And now to my last stitch. We're going to finish off the same way we did the body ribbing. We've got 1 stitch left, snip, and pull the yarn through, and we will weave that in later. All right, so now you're going to want to complete the other sleeve just as you did this sleeve, and you just turn the work over and start picking up stitches just as you did on the other side for this sleeve. Once you've completed that sleeve, I'll meet you back here and show you how to weave in your ends. All right, I have got the sweater complete. I just wanted to show you how to weave in your ends. So first I'll show you how to weave in your collar and sleeve ends. So you're gonna wanna take your tapestry needle and thread the needle. And then for these, for the cuff and the collar, I like to try to mimic the stitch here, and I just kind of weave it through. Everybody's got their like ways they do this, but I just try to weave it through one side and back through the other to kind of close it up and make it look seamless. And then I find a stitch to just go through each loop here on the inside, and I weave this up a ways, and then I just pull the yarn through and trim it. Okay, stretch it out a little bit, and then I will just trim it. And that's how you do the collar and the cuff. I do want to show you a way to kind of close the gaps up at the underarms if you do have a lot of gaps at the underarm. So again, not a real exact science here, but I've got a little gap here, and so I'm going to take one of the strands here that I used to, that's probably the tail that I used to cast on here, and I'm going to separate this out a little bit. I'm just going to kind of weave through some of the stitches that go around that hole there. And then I'm simply just going to kind of try to weave it through one of the holes there to create a little bit of a knot, but I'm not going to do it too tight. And then I'm just going to snip that. Okay, so you can continue to weave in ends there the same way. When you weave in an end, this looks like where I had a double stitch. So that one you can just, that's probably where I joined yarn. So you can just trim that a little bit. So you just continue that for the rest of your ends. Seam those in, and you'll be good to go.